Mass shootings are the modern day American tragedy. But instead of deep diving into why mass shootings occur, we get into politically and socially convenient arguments. The real issue is tyranny by your government and terror by your people. Let me explain. Guns are not the issue. Unfortunately, guns are both the enablers and disablers of tyranny and terror. At the people's worst, the people use guns for terror. At the government's worst, our government uses guns for tyranny. So there's a balance between the tyranny of your government and the terror of your people. And what determines that balance is who has the greater gun rights. I make the argument that gun rights or gun control should be equal across the board for both people and the government. When your people have more firearms or gun rights and freedoms than your government, then it's more likely for your people to engage in terror, right? Mass shootings, school shootings, murders, drive-bys, things of the sort. But when your government has more gun rights and freedoms and restricts the gun rights and freedoms of its citizens, it has a tendency to dive into tyranny. When the people have more gun rights or freedoms than the government, then the government doesn't have really an effective way of checking or responding or preventing terror by the people. On the other hand, when the government has more gun rights or freedoms, gun freedoms, then the people lose their ability to fight against a tyrannical government. Gun rights or gun control, whichever side of the spectrum you're on, must be applied equally across the board to both the people and the government. If the people shouldn't have AR-15s, then their civilian law enforcement shouldn't have AR-15s as well. But if you're going to allow your government, your civilian law enforcement to have machine guns, then those machine guns should also be available to the citizens as well. Whenever there's a mass shooting, there's usually two sides. Those who are calling for gun control and gun bans, and then those who are resisting gun control. And in all actuality, both sides have a viable solution, but if and only if they apply it equally across the board to the people and the government. But once again, guns are not the issue. Trust is the issue. When we call for gun control, what we're saying is we don't trust our fellow citizen to be sane, responsible, or law-abiding gun owners. We don't trust the next man or next woman or next person to not commit heinous and violent crimes. However, the same group that is usually calling for gun control is also the same group that protests against police shootings and state-sanctioned murders. They don't trust the government to uphold the constitutional and human rights of the individuals that they shoot. Many a times these individuals are unarmed. However, they're perfectly fine with taking the rights, particularly the Second Amendment rights, of others who haven't violated any laws, haven't committed any crimes. They want to use the government's power to take away guns, but don't trust the government to use guns in a constitutionally just manner. On the other hand, there's the group that resists gun control, doesn't trust the government at all to uphold or protect their constitutional rights. But when it comes to things that they disagree with, like social protest movements, they are fine with the government utilizing their guns and power to suppress and stop those protests. Interesting. Both sides don't trust the government, but both sides want to utilize the government to take away the rights, infringe upon the rights of the other. And that's where we as a people lose. Because once they are able to subdue one group, it makes it so much easier to subdue the other. Now, why do I say the people and the government? Because in some ways, even though the government is of the people, by the people, and for the people, we as Americans have gotten lazy and allowed our government to be separate from us. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's the Second Amendment. When it comes to the Second Amendment, we can argue whether or not the framers of the Constitution, what they meant by arms. And why can we argue that? Because arms is a capitalized pronoun, proper noun, which means that there's a specific definition. By arms, did they mean that you can have an AR-15 with a 30-round magazine? That's up for debate. But what's not up for debate is that both the people and the government are subject to the Constitution, that neither the people nor the government is above the Constitution. The government specifically has to respect the Constitution and the rights that are written in it. Gun control or gun rights or firearm control or firearm rights has to be equal across the board because the Constitution applies to both the people and the government. But what's most important, more important, and what we have not been talking about is whether the government should be granted greater Second Amendment rights than the people. At the moment, your government has greater Second Amendment rights or gun rights than the people. Is that the right thing to do? That's the question that we have to ask. Although the government and the people are subject to the Constitution, we're underneath the Constitution. Who's higher? Below that bar, below the constitutional bar, is the government above the people or is the people above the government? Look at your gun rights, and your gun rights will tell you that the government is above the people, but under the Constitution. How do we know this? Because your government, meaning your local law enforcement, can have machine guns, sound suppressors, high caliber rifles. They can have that. But we as citizens, it is very challenging and difficult for us to obtain those things. And particularly if you live in certain states like New York or California, good luck. What we have not been talking about is that the Second Amendment was designed to give the people a literal, real fighting chance against their government in the event that their government acted tyrannical. Democracy doesn't protect against tyranny. Tyranny can only be fought by an equal and opposing force of the people. So when you take away firearms because of a very highly emotionally charged moment and tragedy in our country, what we're doing is putting the rest of our fundamental freedoms, the freedom of speech, the freedom to gather and assemble, the freedom to petition our government, ensuring that no soldiers are quartered in our homes during peacetime, the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. You put all of those rights in jeopardy because the only way in which you could protect them, physically protect them, was through the Second Amendment. We have to end mass shootings, active shooters. We have to. Let's make American government accountable.